Welcome to the Clearly Christian Podcast with Dr. Cy Smith. It's time to know more so you can say no more. It's time for the Clearly Christian Podcast. Here's your host, Dr. Cy Smith.
I'm Dr. Cy Smith, and this is Clearly Christian, a podcast about what it means to see the world from God's perspective, and then the impact this has on training the next generation to live a life consistent with the biblical worldview. Again, if you've been listening and you like the show, please leave a review or hit the subscribe button. Let others know that the show's worth listening to, and that'll help advance the cause of Christian education. So thank you again for staying with us and staying tuned, and thanks for joining us on today's Extra Credit episode. Today's Extra Credit version of the podcast is a deeper dive into my chalkboard points with Superintendent of Tree of Life Christian Schools, Dr. Todd Marrah. Again, who's also the president of ACSI as well, the Association of Christian Schools International. So the full episode is live, so just look for the picture of Dr. Todd Marrah. So now for some extra credit, let's go ahead and dive in terms of those chalkboard points. First, point number one, leaders must constantly gauge the horizon in order to navigate change. And again, we talked a lot about this on the episode. Again, leaders must constantly gauge the horizon in order to navigate change. Given the pace and the reality of change in today's culture, really, this idea has become non-negotiable for leaders. If you're change resistant, this is just simply not the job for you. But accepting and making change is one thing. Accurately engaging or actually accurately gauging the horizon is something completely different. Leaders have to acquire the wisdom and the mindset of big picture thinking. And that's John Maxwell's quote. And I love what he says about some of this stuff. So I'm going to relate a few of these points to you now. He says, big picture thinking allows you to lead well. And that may be obvious, but it's worth mentioning. You can see the vision before others do. You can size up the situation. You can look at all the variables and the dynamics that might come into play. You can sketch a picture of where you want to go, show how the future connects with the past. And these are critical things as a leader. So it just allows you to lead well. There's just no doubt about it. And leaders who last and leaders who endure are able to look at the big picture. Big picture thinking also allows you to keep your focus on the target or keep you on target as a worker. To get things done, you need to focus. However, to get the right things done, you need to consider the big picture, writes John Maxwell. And that's a very accurate assessment as well. Narrowing that lane and making sure that you're getting those right things accomplished. You can do that by looking at the big picture. Number three, big picture thinking promotes teamwork. That's excellent. The better everyone grasp the objective and the big picture, then they're greater the potential increases to work together as a team. And I've certainly seen that in my own leadership experiences down through the years. Go ahead and give them that big picture. Let them know why we're doing what we're doing, where it is that we're going, and that certainly allows them to engage and help them reach that work potential. Number four, big picture thinking keeps you from getting caught up in the mundane. And I like what he says here. The person who forgets the ultimate gets caught up or is a slave to the immediate. And we talked about that on the podcast. There are moments when you need to have your head down and you need to get to work. But big picture thinking allows you to get that head up. And that is critical. If you never get that head up, you'll focus on the immediate and you'll forget the ultimate. There's times you're going to have to look at your schedule and say, what's the most important thing for me to be doing here? Narrowing my focus, getting my head up, and making sure I keep my eyes on the big picture. And then finally, big picture thinking helps you chart uncharted territory, because as a leader, you're often going to have to step out of the boat or maybe go down a path where nobody else has gone. And that's how innovations occur, and that's how people make progress. And big picture thinking allows you to get there. You're going to have to break new ground and look beyond the immediate. And this is, again, a huge advantage of being a big picture thinker. So you got to train yourself to have that kind of mindset. God's given you a mind for thinking, for reasoning, of course, and creating. So let's not wait for the world to move and then respond. Let's passionately work to make our schools wonderful places for spiritual discipleship and scholarship and for all the training that's needed there. We are striving for excellence. And in doing so, we've got to make improvements. And to do that, you've got to constantly be changing, constantly be looking at the big picture so that you can accurately gauge what's on the horizon. The leadership that matters most is convictional, because only a passionate belief in the conviction is what's going to endure that test of time. In his book, The Conviction to Lead, which I've mentioned on this podcast before, Albert Mohler wrote this: convictions are not merely the beliefs we hold. They're those beliefs that actually hold us in their grip. And I love that analogy. They hold us in a grip, because without them, we wouldn't know how to lead at all. They actually define us. And that's a great point. Just as our faith as Christians begins with those bedrock beliefs that define who we are as Christians, right leadership begins when you know that your convictions matter. You say, I want to be a leader who matters because I know that my convictions matter. I know my beliefs are grounded in the truth. I know what I believe is true, and so I want to act on those things, and I want to make a difference. Well, this kind of convictional leadership requires patience and endurance over time. You need to stay long enough to see the fruits of your decisions, both good and bad, and the organization has to experience this as well. There'll be days when everyone recognizes your insight or your courage when things go right. And there's also going to be those tough days when everybody needs to recognize that you're taking the blame for either a bad decision you made or a bad decision that someone else made. Endurance offers that blessing of a long memory, but then also even a longer period of evaluation in terms of what's been done. And those are both good things, and they're kind of rare air in leadership circles today. Eugene Peterson describes Christian perseverance as a long obedience in the same direction. A long obedience in the same direction. That's a great quote. The Christian life is often just a matter of simple obedience, putting one foot in front of the other and refusing to fall. Great point. The difficulty for most of us, however, is in that long part. And this is certainly true for Christian leadership. Leadership requires maturing and learning and, again, patience and evaluating and changing course. And none of these things come quickly or easily. Mohler writes, in fact, that far too many leaders move from one position to another because they just don't want to endure the lessons that only time and tenure can teach. They build a long resume, but they cast no shadow. They serve in a leadership position, but they really are not leading. Convictional leaders who know their convictions are grounded in the truth know that leadership has an endpoint, but those convictions will endure. And they just know that. And they know that because these truths are eternal, established by God who's eternal, then they have to possess that commitment to stay, and they have to have the ability to wait. And they just recognize that and they get that. So they hang in there and they weather some of those storms. So what kind of legacy will you lead? Listen, honor the convictions that God has placed within you in terms of that position of leadership, and He will be faithful to carry you through. Well, thank you so much again for joining me, and thank you to each of you who are listening or watching online. We certainly appreciate you, and I trust that now you know more about what it takes to lead well over time, the importance of and the impact of big picture thinking and leading with passionate convictions. I know there was a lot to digest in today's episode, so I'd encourage you to rewatch or re-listen and really grab hold and reflect on some of the things that you heard Dr. Marrah say today. Again, if you'd like what you're listening to, I encourage you to hit the subscribe button, leave a review, help us spread the word. We definitely want to get this out there, that the show's worth paying attention to so that we can advance the cause of Christian education. Because remember, the only way we're going to turn things around in this country is to simply increase the number of people who live and operate every day with a biblical worldview and see things from God's perspective. And the greatest hope to get there is Christian education. So thank you again for joining us today on behalf of Dr. Marrah. I'm again Dr. Cy Smith with the Clearly Christian Education Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Clearly Christian Podcast with Dr. Cy Smith. Hear more episodes at clearlychristianeducation.com. If you'd like more information about Christian education in your neighborhood, or if you're interested in education opportunities at Mansfield Christian School, or if you agree with Dr. Smith and want to help him in his mission to influence and awaken Christian America, you can send Dr. Smith an email through the clearlychristianeducation.com website. Message him on the Clearly Christian LinkedIn or Facebook page, or call the Clearly Christian Connect Connection line at 419-756-5651. This has been the Clearly Christian Podcast with Dr. Cy Smith on clearlychristianeducation.com, brought to you in conjunction with Mansfield Christian School, a Bryan Media production.